Liberals put Canadian lives at risk. Hey y'all, how you doing? Welcome to my channel. I hope you're having a great day. On Tuesday, Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer called on the Bloc and the NDP to support their request for a recall of the Public Safety Committee. So far, the Bloc and the NDP have supported the Liberals in refusing to recall important committees. But as you'll see, the Conservatives believe that this is a matter of life and death. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
Morning, everyone. Last week, Canadians were shocked and horrified to find out of a terrorist plot planned by a father and son who appear to have links to ISIS. Evidence exists that the father was involved in a horrific torture attack in an ISIS video. Shortly after the events in the video, this individual was admitted into Canada and later was granted citizenship by the Trudeau government. This is a colossal failure of Trudeau's national security system. Canadians have a right to know what went wrong. How did this individual gain entry into Canada and obtain Canadian citizenship? Canadians also have a right to know if there are anybody else, if there's anyone else in Canada with similar backgrounds who are granted entry into our country. My colleague, Frank Caputo, the acting public safety critic for the Conservative Party, has written a letter to Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety, demanding that the details surrounding this foiled terrorist plot be made public so that Canadians can get answers. So today, Conservatives are calling on the Bloc and NDP to support our efforts to recall the Public Safety Committee so that we can investigate all the aspects of this disturbing and shocking event. To date, Minister LeBlanc has not made these details public. That's why the committee meeting and the committee investigation is so critical. Now, unfortunately, over the last few weeks, Conservatives have made a number of requests to recall committees to investigate important issues that are facing Canadians, like the dramatic rise in violent crime, or the diversion of Justin Trudeau's taxpayer-funded narcotics into our streets, or the anti-Israel and justification of terrorism remarks by the Liberal-appointed Human Rights Commissioner. And unfortunately, the Bloc and NDP have refused to support our recall of these committees and instead have chosen to stay on their summer vacations. This incident, though, demands that the committee be recalled. This is serious. Lives are on the line. We potentially would have seen the loss of innocent life had the RCMP not caught these suspects before they were able to perpetrate their horrific crimes. So we're calling on the Bloc and NDP to come back to Ottawa to recall the committee so that Canadians can get answers on this most important and pressing matter. Lives are at stake when national security systems don't do their job. Lives are at stake when people with connections to terrorist organizations are allowed into Canada and granted citizenship.
I did a video on this RCMP arrest last week, and now we hear that the father in this video appeared in an ISIS terrorist video where he was the perpetrator of a torture event. And yet the Liberal government under Trudeau allowed him into the country and subsequently allowed him to become a Canadian citizen. This should never have happened. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United Kingdom is seeing the results of their mass, uncontrolled, unvetted immigration policies as well. There have recently been massive protests by concerned citizens. Unfortunately, some of those have become violent. In response, the UK Prime Minister has designated a special police unit to follow these protesters around. Now, I'm not saying that's uncalled for, but there is a double standard here. While the concerned citizens are treated with a heavy police presence, the more organized migrant mobs who are rioting are showing up at these riots with knives, swords, and clubs. And recently they attacked a pub, a pub goer, and they terrorized the patrons of that pub. Let's take a look at the video of that incident.
There were protesters turned up in Birmingham. Now, according to Jess Phillips, they were made to do this.
That's the Home Office Minister.
Because the far right apparently goaded them and agitated them to coming out and having a row. And they obviously thought they would, and they took over this roundabout. They ragged their cars around there with absolute impunity. As you can see, no police there, no high-vis jackets, nobody in riot masks. And you wonder why we're asking questions about whether people are treated differently, dependent on their identity in this country. Have a look at this as well.
Community leaders have been speaking to the police as well because...
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
Right, I think, apologies for the language you're hearing, but a sense of the anger, I think you can hear there.
Yeah, Casey, I think we...
And that trigger of a gun there, right down the lens of the camera, that's reassuring, isn't it?
And then they went on to, this group of young Muslim men, the Clumsy Swan pub in Birmingham, and they were waving Palestinian flags. Of course, that has to get involved into the mix. And they attacked a man.
So that guy had gone out into the beer garden on his own and was just stood there in his T-shirt. He was clearly not involved. He's not there politically. He'd obviously just wandered out having a pint. So let's go now to Charlie Peters, who's at that pub in Birmingham. Good morning, Charlie. First of all, do we know the condition of that victim of that assault?
Well, we'll be speaking to the assistant manager of this pub in a moment, who'll have more information on that individual, but we've not seen any updates from the authorities who attended this scene last night. But we do know that while that man was out front here at the Clumsy Swan pub in Yardley, everybody else was inside barricading themselves. After that masked mob, many of those men armed with machetes of South Asians descended onto the scene after a prior protest at Bordsley Green, about half a mile away from this location. They started gathering about 5 p.m. on a roundabout by a McDonald's upon reports that a so-called far-right protest, an anti-immigration protest, would be gathering there. No such protest occurred, but we did see that arrival of men in masks, many of them carrying weapons and threatening journalists. They then moved here, and we can see some of the damage to the pub from last night. This window smashed in, and there's also some evidence of some of the barricading that took place last night. It was a karaoke night here at the pub. There were families inside, children, granddaughters attending this event, when suddenly hundreds of men arrived. And I've watched some of the live streams of that footage last night where those who were actually on their way to that location were saying that they were there to dominate and intimidate people.
The hypocrisy and double standards are insane. What did the UK and Canadian governments think would happen with uncontrolled, unvetted immigration? Not only have they allowed massive immigration into our country, but the havoc that these newcomers have caused has largely gone unchecked and unchallenged. They've cracked down on the long-term residents who are justly angry at all of the violence and all of the protests and all the calls for violence, but they allow these newcomers to get away with far worse crimes. And now we find out how reckless the Canadian government has been. The fact that they've allowed a known terrorist who appeared as a perpetrator in an ISIS torture video to become a Canadian citizen. The RCMP were quickly able to uncover evidence of these crimes. It begs the question, why weren't Immigration and Passport Canada able to do the same? I often wonder, and it's just speculation on my behalf, but has Passport and Immigration Canada and other Canadian agencies been infiltrated by groups like UNRWA, the same UN organization whose personnel participated in the October 7th terrorist attacks that started the war in Gaza? It might not be as far-fetched as what you might think. With the uncontrolled immigration and the subsequent massive protests calling for violence and being pro-terror, I can only assume that there's been a massive shift in the fabric of our country under the Trudeau government and previous Liberal governments, to the point where the Canada that we all know that was tolerant and relatively peaceful is lost, and we'll probably never get it back. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to know what you have to say. Put your comments down below. And while you're at it, please like this video, share with your friends and on social media, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Oh, and by the way, I do have another channel, Cavalryman USA, where I talk about US politics. If you think that would interest you, please go to that channel, watch those videos, and subscribe there as well. There is a link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.